Part 2 of Chapter 20, and this is going to be on lymphoid cells, tissues, and organs. So our lymphoid cells consist of 1, immune cells that are found in lymphoid tissues, and 2, supporting cells that are going to form lymphoid tissue structures. So we start off with the immune system cells, and this is going to include our lymphocytes. And our lymphocytes are part of adaptive immunity, and we're going to talk really in depth about what adaptive immunity is when we get to chapter 21. But just as kind of a little brief intro, adaptive immunity is a type of immunity that requires response to an antigen in order to become activated. So it's not just something that's there waiting, it actually has to become activated for it to work. And then these lymphocytes will mature into one of two main types. So we have T cells or T lymphocytes and B cells or B lymphocytes. So T cells and B cells both protect us against antigens. And antigens are anything that the body perceives as foreign. And examples of this are bacteria, toxins, viruses, mismatched red blood cells, cancer cells, and they do different things. So B cells and T cells do different things. T cells manage the immune response, and some also attack and destroy infected cells. And B cells produce these things called plasma cells, which in turn secrete antibodies. And then antibodies go and mark antigens for destruction by phagocytosis or other means. And again, we'll talk about this in more depth in chapter 21. Other lymphoid immune cells include macrophages and dendritic cells, and these are both really important. Macrophages phagocytize foreign substances, so macro means big and phage means eater, so they are big eaters. And in addition to phagocytosing foreign substances, they also help activate T cells. And this is another one of those things we'll talk about in more depth in chapter 21, but just so you know, in order for a T cell to become activated, another cell has to first kind of present the antigen to it. And then we have dendritic cells, and these are going to capture antigens and deliver them to the lymph nodes, and they also help activate T cells. And then we have the supporting lymphoid cell, and this is going to be reticular cells, and these are going to produce reticular fibers called stroma. And stroma is network-like support that acts as scaffolding for immune cells. So this right here is showing you a lymph node. And what we have is we have these kind of reticular fibers in here. And then we have the sinuses, and we have the lymphocytes. Remember, they could be B cells or T cells. Macrophages are residing in here. So the main functions of lymphoid tissue are to do two things: house and provide proliferation sites for lymphocytes, and offer surveillance vantage points for lymphocytes and macrophages as they filter through lymph. Lymphoid tissue is largely composed of reticular connective tissue. And if you remember from AMP1, reticular connective tissue is a loose connective tissue type. The macrophages live on the reticular fibers, which I showed you on the previous slide. And then the spaces between the fibers give a place for the lymphocytes to kind of hang out whenever they return from patrolling the body. There are two main types of lymphoid tissue. There's diffuse lymphoid tissue. This is a loose arrangement of lymphoid cells and some reticular fibers. This is found in virtually every organ of the body, and larger collections are found in the lamina propria of mucous membranes. The other type of lymphoid tissue, the other main type, I should say, are lymphoid follicles or nodules. These are solid spherical bodies consisting of tightly packed lymphoid cells and reticular fibers. They contain these things called germinal centers, and germinal centers have a bunch of B cells in them that are proliferating, and they may form part of a larger lymphoid organ called a node, a lymph node. Then lymphoid organs are grouped into two functional categories. We have primary lymphoid organs and secondary lymphoid organs. The primary lymphoid organs are where T cells and B cells mature. So for T cells, this is going to be the thymus. And for B cells, this is going to be the red bone marrow. Now, even though they do mature in different parts of the body, both T cells and B cells originate in the bone marrow. And then we have the secondary lymphoid organs, and these are going to be the areas where mature lymphocytes first encounter their antigen and become activated. This could be lymph nodes, the spleen, MALT, which is mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, and diffuse lymphoid tissues. So the primary lymphoid organs are the thymus. The thymus sits up here. We'll talk a little bit more about the thymus later on. It'll be another talk, though, I believe. And then the red bone marrow. So the red bone marrow is where T cells and B cells both are formed, but the red bone marrow is where the B cells are going to mature, and the thymus is where the T cells are going to mature. Secondary lymphoid organs include lymph nodes, tonsils, the spleen, Peyer's patches, appendix, and we're going to talk about all these in more detail. So lymph nodes are the principal secondary lymphoid organ of the body. So even though there are secondary lymphoid organs, they are the principal secondary lymphoid organ of the body. There are hundreds of nodes found throughout the body. Most are found embedded deep in connective tissue and clusters along the lymphatic vessels. Some are nearer to the body surfaces where collecting vessels converge into trunks. And so like the cervical regions, the axillary regions. This is just the same thing. This is just kind of showing, this is an image that we saw earlier, but this is showing the lymphatic system, and then you can see these little bulges, which are all lymph nodes. So these would be our cervical nodes up in here, axillary nodes, and like I said, you can just see the nodes throughout the body. Lymph nodes have two main functions. One is to cleanse the lymph. They act as lymph filters. The macrophages, the big eaters, are going to remove and destroy microorganisms and debris that enter the lymph. And what this is going to do is this is going to prevent unwanted substances from being delivered to the blood. We do not want to deliver bacteria to the blood. So the macrophages hopefully take care of it. The second function of lymph nodes is immune system activation. This is going to give the lymphocytes a place to become activated and to mount an attack against antigens. The lymph nodes vary in shape and size, but they usually are bean shaped. They're pretty small, about an inch. They have an external fibrous capsule, and then the capsule fibers extend inward as trabeculae that divide the node into compartments. There's two histologically distinct regions of the node, the cortex and the medulla. The cortex is that superficial area of cortex contains follicles with germinal centers that again have those it's heavy with dividing B cells. So basically what this means is in the cortex, you're going to find germinal centers, and in those germinal centers, you're going to find dividing B cells. Sorry about that. Forgot to turn the phone on silent. Deep cortex is going to house the T cells in transit, and the T cells are going to circulate continuously among blood, lymph nodes, and lymph. Abundant numbers of dendritic cells are closely associated with both T cells and B cells, and the dendritic cells play a role in activating both types of lymphocytes. The medulla has these cords that extend inward from the cortex and contain B cells, T cells, and plasma cells. And then there's lymph sinuses found throughout the node. They consist of large lymphatic capillaries spanned by crisscrossing reticular fibers, and then macrophages reside on the fibers, checking for and phagocytizing any foreign material. This is a lymph node. The cortex is on the outside. We find the germinal centers. Okay, this would be the medulla in here. This is showing afferent lymphatic vessels. You can see, I'm going to point this out now because it's going to pop up on a slide in a minute. We have more afferent lymphatic vessels, and afferent lymphatic vessels are going to be the vessels that are bringing lymph into the lymph node. We have fewer efferent lymphatic vessels, and this is going to be important. And Okay, so the lymph enters the convex side of the node via the afferent lymphatic vessels, which I just showed you. It's going to travel through large subcapsular sinus, and then in a smaller sinus is found throughout the cortex and the medulla, and then it's going to enter the medullary sinuses. Finally, it exits out the concave side called the hilum via the efferent vessels. So if you're having a hard time remembering which vessels bring the lymph in, if you're getting afferent and efferent confused, A comes before E in the alphabet, and the afferent vessels are first, and then the efferent vessels are second. Because of the fact that there are fewer efferent lymphatic vessels, the flow can somewhat stagnate. And what this does is it gives the lymphocytes and the macrophages time to do their job. And lymph travels through several different nodes. And this is the lymph node again. So afferent vessels are on this outside here, and then the efferent vessels are on the kind of inside of this. It almost looks like a kidney, sort of. But you can see again, there's fewer efferent vessels, which is going to cause that flow to stagnate, which is going to give lymphocytes and macrophages time to do their job. And here are your questions.